So as I said at the beginning of this podcast, talking about New Year's, I spent my New Year's Eve watching basically the Alabama-Clemson game, and I didn't watch the or not Alabama-Clemson, sorry, the Alabama-Michigan State, but I didn't really watch the Oklahoma-Clemson because I was really asleep the whole time. I was after my food coma. I kind of just fell asleep all the way through it. But I do want to talk about that a little bit, about the playoffs, and then I did watch on New Year's the regular, the other bowls. And I do want to talk about real quick, just before I talk about the recaps from those games and give a little bit of a prediction for the the college football final. I want to say this one thing about the playoff. They need to do two things. They need to not schedule games on New Year's Eve because no one really watched them compared to last year at least. And my theory on that was it's not really ESPN's fault, but it's more of they're trying to keep the integrity of when the bowls were. So like last year they had the Rose Bowl and the Fiesta Bowl, which were both New Year's Day games. Those were both the college football semifinals, and then the other two, the Cotton Bowl and the Orange Bowl. The Orange Bowl were the New Year's Eve games. Sorry about that, I dropped my mic. And those were the New Year's. Those the same games were the same days this year, and they've always been on the same days. But I think that they just had to keep the integrity of the time, and rotating between 6 bowls with the college football playoff isn't really going to work because every 3 years they're going to have that rotation where it's going to be like, so last year was the Cotton or the Fiesta and the Rose. This year is the Orange and the Cotton Bowl, and the next year, I don't know what next year is, honestly, I can't think of it. But next year is another two bowls, and then it's going to go back. So 2017 is going to be those next 2 bowls, and then 2018 is going to be the first 2 again, the Rose and the Cotton, and that'll be on New Year's again. So that's how they're trying to keep that integrity of that when the bowls are played, and that kind of screwed them up and kind of messed up their scheduling and all that. And that's not really anyone's fault besides the committee, who needs to figure out, hey, we need to play college football playoff games on New Year's Day, not New Year's Eve. Obviously keep the Rose Bowl there, but you could flex one of the other games that are played on New Year's to another day. You can move them, you can shuffle them around, but keep New Year or the Rose Bowl on the same day, just because it's always played on New Year's Day at the end of the day. And I think they need to figure out a way to do that. I could think of it, but I'd have to have a lot of looking and shuffling, and every year it'd have to be different kind of deal. But that's the first thing. And then the second thing, they need to expand to 6 teams, as I was showed in the Rose Bowl and I think it was Fiesta, that basically by Ohio State and Stanford. Stanford completely dismantled a overrated Iowa team, and Ohio State kind of lit up that Notre Dame team. And I think those two should have been in the playoff. If we had 6 teams, you could have the 2 byes, and then the 2, just a 3-week playoff basically, and I think it would have been good. Could have had Ohio State against whatever number 3 would be. That'd be Michigan State, and then you'd have Oklahoma and Stanford, or flip-flop Ohio State and Stanford. That's really whichever one you want. And I think it would have been really good for those teams, because they all 4 of those bowls were kind of just blowouts. Actually, all 6 of them were kind of blowouts. And I think it was just kind of just a weak year for bowls all together. I'm watching the Oregon TCU game as I'm recording this, and that game's really good right now. It's in double overtime. Oregon just kicked a field goal, and I think if they just went up to six teams, that'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bowls. You could do that, and you could have the 6th one be whatever, and you just keep the 5 the same each year, and that kind of deal. Obviously, you can't do that until the bowl contracts run out for the playoff, but still. So, going right into the recaps, I'm going to start with the game I didn't really watch first. This is all really stat-based. This was the Clemson-Oklahoma game. Clemson won 37-17. it was kind of interesting looking at the stats. Baker Mayfield stats-wise, had a better game just because he had more passing yards. He had like 340. He also had 2 interceptions, though. And that kind of interceptions always kill the team, kill the drives, all that kind of stuff. And that's just kind of not a good thing to do, is just throw picks. And obviously he's kind of young. I think he's a junior. He could get better next year, and Oklahoma could be right back in here again. But Clemson, really, what they did was they owned the time of possession the whole game, and they were a little bit better of a rushing team than Oklahoma's. They basically have 2 or 3 guys that can rush at any given play with Deshaun Watson, and then their running backs, and they have a couple like fly patterns with their wide receiver kind of stuff. And it's gonna be really interesting to see what they do in the finals here. But I'm seeing the one big stat that kind of stood out. Well, 2 big stats that kind of stood out to me, at least as the team stats, was that Oklahoma was 5 for 13 on third down, while Clemson was 9 for 19. And converting third downs are obviously a good thing, and you need to do that to keep in games and do all that stuff. And sticking on the third down kind of train, Oklahoma had 4 3-and-outs, and 3 of those were in the second half. And why I mentioned that 3 of them were in the second half is because they went into the second half leading, and then ended up not getting shut out in the second half. And Clemson throughout the whole game had 1 3-and-out. So that's kind of how they can determine or kept the time of possession, is they didn't really go 3-and-out very much in the game, obviously. And Deshaun Watson kind of owned the game. He had 330 total yards, and that was only 40 less than Oklahoma had as a team, because Clemson had 530 and Oklahoma had 378. So Watson kind of showed out and did a lot of things for his team. And his ability as a passer and runner, he's one of the best running quarterbacks in the NCAA right now. At least I believe so, as I see it. And that's going to really hurt. That really hurt Oklahoma, because they never really seen that this year. They saw Trayvon Boykin, who's really good, but he's not as good of a passer as he is runner. I mean, he's a good passer. Obviously, he's in college passing, but he's not like a top tier passer. And then they got, there's no one really in the Big 12 that can really do both. That Texas Tech quarterback might, but not as well as Watson can do it. So it's all that, I guess. But another thing I saw was that Shaq Lawson, their best defender, Clemson, got hurt. He's going to be the key to their defense against Alabama in the final game, just because he's a really good run stuffer, and they need to really stop Derrick Henry and kind of limit what Jake Coker does. And a couple of things that just little questions that I'm going to try and, what I'm going to be looking for in that finals game is, can Clemson stop Henry with or without Shaq Lawson? And then what Alabama does is they kind of control the quick hikes, or they don't control it. They do quick hikes after big plays, so they run up to the line real quick and then run a play just to kind of get either an offsides or catch them off guard and get a touchdown kind of deal. Can Clemson stop that? What's Watson's ability to be a dual threat against that good Alabama defense? Is Clemson really fast enough, especially at the defensive backs in the back 7, to keep up with Calvin Ridley of the Alabama, who I'm going to talk about here in a second, and Kenyon Drake, who's the change of pace speed back at Alabama? And then who guards O.J. Howard on Clemson? That's going to be really the big question there. I'm going to talk about that why right now. So I'm moving on to the Alabama-Michigan State game. I did watch this game all the way through, took a lot of notes. I have 2 pages of notes here. And Bama did end up winning 38-0. And so going quarter by quarter here, in the first quarter I really started to notice that Michigan State's right side of their line looked really overmatched and not really ready for this game. And they didn't really look good to me, and they wasn't really They look really overmatched is the best way to say it, I guess. There's no other better way to say it. And then, obviously, that quarter is very defensive. I think it was 0-0 coming out of it. And Bama really set up their passing game in that quarter and said that they're going to use swing passes and screen passes to get the ball down the field more and all that kind of stuff. And it's going to be really interesting to see what they do in the championship game. So on to the second quarter. And in that second quarter, scoring really got going. And that's about all I could say about this. Derrick Henry broke the 2,000-yard mark in this quarter. And I'm going to do a little bit more of a Heisman comparison in a couple of weeks here. But he really didn't look that good. And he didn't really run that well. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit here. But one thing I did take away from this quarter was O.J. Howard is probably one of the best tight ends in the nation, if not the best. He's just big, explosive, can catch the ball really fast. I don't see any way that anyone can really block him at the next level. It's going to be interesting to see what he does in the NFL draft, in the NFL. And the biggest stat from this is that Michigan State was -9 in rushing yards in the half, and you can't really do that and win the game. It's really hard to do. So going on to the second half, the Michigan State consistently stopped the run, something most Alabama teams or opponents couldn't do, and that kind of just messed up Derrick Henry. But as it kind of went on, Henry didn't wear him down, but rather the speed of who's the other one? Kenyon Drake wore him down, so it was kind of interesting. But Calvin Ridley stepped up and became the playmaker. He burned MSU on a couple big plays for 50 yards throughout the game. He looks really fast, his big play ability, good catching ability, but one kind of big thing that I noticed was he's older. He's 21 years old as a freshman, a true freshman. That's kind of worrisome and kind of cheating, I would say, but that's another time. Jones got hurt in this. I can't think of his Cyrus Jones. He is the punt returner for Alabama. He got hurt this quarter. He did come back, but that's something to note that he did get hurt. And then there was a couple big missed penalties that Jacob Coker was running out of bounds, and he threw it away so he wouldn't lose yardage. But it was basically an intentional grounding, and they should have called it, but they didn't. And then later in this quarter, Cyrus Jones came back, returned a touchdown off a punt. There's a bunch of missed tackles and a lot of stuff that was bad from Michigan State that I saw in that. And it wasn't really good for them. And then moving on to, well, I guess at the very end of this quarter, they started to lose confidence in themselves. Michigan State did, and they kind of just started to cave, make mental mistakes, and just break down. And then, like I said, Derrick Henry kind of took over in the fourth quarter and started running all over Michigan State's defense. He's faster and more of a multi-cut back, and I think he's going to do a lot better than Henry will. And he's just faster and a lot better. So I guess the key points out of this was that MSU's line looked awful, and they couldn't establish a run game. And then the receivers had a bunch of drops too. That didn't really help. Then Derrick Henry only had 75 yards on 20 attempts. And then he had 2 touchdowns, but they weren't really draw-dropping touchdowns. They were 11 yards and 1 yard. That's nothing really to be amazed by, so I didn't really understand that one. Then Jacob Coker, I don't know why people are freaking out, why he's like the best of all time kind of thing. He's the traditional Bama game manager. He threw a bunch of quick passes, screens, and swing routes, and everyone's like, oh, he's the best of all time, but he's just a traditional Bama quarterback who's throwing these little dink and duck plays and throws one deep occasionally. I think he only had like 3 passes over 35 yards, and I don't see why he's that good. I mean, he is good, but he's no better than any other quarterback in the nation. He's average at most. And the only thing I see here is that Michigan State, it really didn't have a good line. like I said, but Connor Cook really does look NFL ready right now. I could see him stepping right into the NFL and becoming a starter like right away, or being a backup that comes in, kind of like what Kirk Cousins' predecessor did. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about here, well, last two things. Michigan State was kind of destined to lose. They were pretty one-dimensional on offense. They didn't really have a run game or anything. And that made them do mental mistakes and play really tired on the offensive side or defensive side. Then the last thing, 3 weeks is way, or it might have been 4. The amount of time that they had off was way too much to give to Saban and other coaches like Urban Meyer and these other these coaches that are just like really smart and know what they're doing. That's way too much time to give to them. And like David Shaw, Urban Meyer, Saban, all that, that's just way too much time. They need to figure something out, like either cut that time down or do something. There needs to be some way to kind of prevent that. And that's just my honest recap of this game. I see. So obviously it's Bama versus Clemson. The keys to that game are going to be what can Clemson do defensively against Derrick Henry, and can they figure out Jake Coker? Shouldn't be that hard. And then is Deshaun Watson going to do Deshaun Watson things and be a dual threat kind of attack that Bama's had trouble with in the past couple years? Or will he just try to be one-dimensional and shut down because he's a true sophomore, or is he going to step up and be, I guess, have that confidence to come into that game? And then the last thing would probably be, what does Alabama's defense do to that? And you can't really pinpoint that one, but that's kind of along the same lines as what will Watson do. And then who's going to utilize this time better, Dabo Swinney or Saban? And I really can't tell that. I could usually tell that by the end of the first quarter. So I guess we'll see what happens at this game. I don't really have a prediction or anything. It's going to be interesting to see if Clemson's wide receiver and the guys that were suspended for this game come back or not. But we'll find out as we get closer. More information always comes out, and I guess you can't really find out anything till the game's played, as I've always been told. So I guess we'll see January 11th.